Hi, this is the review of the orderIT trade activity for November the 17th, 2020. I have my orderIT client application open and my evaluation spreadsheet, and we'll just go through each one to see which is buy and which is not. In general, we've had 16 trades that occurred today. 7 were identified as buy trades and 9 were identified as short sells. Starting with CIN, this was identified as a short sell. It was tripped at 11.2530 at a price of 43.50. It actually closed at 44.04. Sienna Corporation is the name of the company. As you can see, it actually dropped down to the trigger price, so it actually dropped today also, even though it was up during the day. And we can see that it tripped right around 11.25 and it came up to here, and we can see right after it dropped it came up, and that should probably be the analysis showing the same thing. Yes, OBV was down and then moved up. MACD again tripped early morning, or was actually late morning, and then just shot up. At the end of the day, you could see MACD was showing it was coming down again, but unfortunately it raised up quite a bit where it was not a positive. DI, morning it was down, afternoon it was down, the mid-afternoon was basically up, so they were showing, and the Bollinger Band showing the same thing, dropping. Then it reverted, or came back up, and at the end of the day it was showing down. It was still considered a negative trade, as you can see it was nowhere near positive at the end of the day, and there was no point during the day that it was even coming down, so that technically was not a positive trade at all. DRI, Darden Restaurant Incorporated. It was tripped at 11.31 at a price of 107.61, and it actually came up at the end of the day at 108.53. It was down 1.41% during the day, so it was down. But unfortunately, it actually ended the day above the trigger price, which was at around 11.30, which is right around this price. As you see, it came back up. So the analysis, OBV showing positive upward trend, so it looks like volume-wise it was moving up. MACD, it was down early morning, a little bit mid-afternoon, a little bit later afternoon, but mostly bouncing back and forth. DI, up in the morning, up somewhat in the mid-afternoon, and then down again. Bollinger Band showing the same thing, so that is also not a positive buy either. Next trade is CMS. It was a short sell also. CMS Energy Corporation. Tripped at 12.10.34 at a price of 64.62. Ended the day at 63.83. So by default, that's a positive trade because it ended the day below its tripping price, and we'll just validate that by looking at the analysis indicators. Yeah, OBV is somewhat just showing, moving sideways during most of the day. End of the day it came down. MACD showing the same thing. It was showing somewhat negative, and then showing positive in the morning, but bouncing back and forth. Basically baseline MACD and then end day showing down, and DI again showing very heavily down at the end of the day. As you can see, Bollinger Band is actually showing it was moving slowly downwards for most part of the day, and at the end of the day it just shot down again. So it was holding for the day, but then at the end of the day it dropped. CELH, Celsius Holdings, excuse me. It was tripped at a price of $32.77, and this was actually a buy trade. Tripped at 12/20/15 at a price of $32.77, and ended the day at $32.31. So that is not showing positive there, but we can see at 12:20, which is right around here, you see 32.86, so you can see it did come up even during that time. $33, $33. Okay, I consider this a positive trade because there's points during the rest of the day after the trigger price where it did come up above the trigger price. End of the day, it just happened to end its day below that, with some down. So like it came up somewhat mid-afternoon. It came up and then dropped roughly in the late afternoon or afternoon period. So while it did end the day good with respect to this trade, it's still positive because there was points where it did trade above. Then again, these are one of the interesting trades because the orderIT system actually identified this trade as a as a buying trade, even though it was down. But as you can see, it was moving upwards fairly consistently, and the trigger was valid in identifying it as a buy trade as opposed to a sell trade. Even though it was down, it was still moving up fairly consistently. OBB on that stock. Yep, I can see that it was moving up for the most part, kind of like sideways during most of the day. It did come down at the end of the day, which is basically what we saw. It did come down at the end of the day price-wise. MACD actually was bouncing back and forth. You know, it was actually down quite a bit during the day with MACD. And MACD is actually showing that it was coming up at the end of the day, surprisingly. DI, though, as you can see, bouncing back and forth. It was as strong negative as it was positive, so we just happened to catch a stock that was somewhat moving fairly strongly as much as negatively, and so you were able to catch it moving positive, and the result would have been positive. And you can see Bollinger Band also showing it back and forth. So it's a stock that you would have had to monitor, but again it had points during the daytime that a positive result could have been made. Next trade is DPW Holdings Incorporated. It tripped at 12/20/24 at a price of $176. It's indicated as a buy trade, and as you can see, it actually dropped. It was down actually almost 3.5%. So this stock was actually down, even though it was tripped as positive. You can see early morning, it's actually showing that it's actually moving positive. So this stock technically is a positive trade because early morning is showing that it came back up. But we'll see if there's any points during the daytime that came up above. 12:20, right around there. 175. It actually did not. It actually did not. OBB showing that it was moving up till mid-afternoon, then dropped. Morning time, late morning, early afternoon, then dropped and started to come back up again. MACD showing the same thing. DI showing the same thing, Bollinger Band showing the same thing. So it was showing the fact that it was moving up, but there was negative movement also, and it did not move above its trading indication point, entry point. I can't mark this as a possible because there's nothing strongly here indicating it's moving positive from the indicators, so this is going to be indicated as a negative trade, even though the stock shows that it came up above the trigger price in early morning trading activity. So technically, after the fact, it was positive trade, but during the day it was a negative trade. So I'll mark it as a negative because the system itself is a day trading system, and the whole premise is that you should be able to get out by the end of the day with a positive outcome, and that one just was not showing it strongly enough at the end of the day, even to be a possible trade. Next trade is GM. It's identified as a buy trade. It was tripped at 12:25.03 at 42.44, and it was closing at 41.98. See if there's any point. 12.25, so right around that area. 42.44. Did it come up anywhere? 42.44, 42.44, 42.48, 48. I'm going to mark this one as a possible, because it did come up above its trading price, but as you can see, it was very questionable. We'll check to see if the indicators will maybe indicate more of a positive activity, which would give it a more positive outcome. As you can see, OBV volume-wise, no, it actually was moving somewhat sideways till mid-afternoon and then dropped. MACD basically showing that it was dropping for the day. It was actually down during the daytime. And VI showing that it was moving positive up till mid-afternoon and then dropped. So VI is somewhat a duplication of OBV. Bollinger Band was showing that it was moving strongly but then dropped. I'll keep it as is because it's the DI, the indicators themselves are not showing any, basic, movement in the direction that it should be for it to indicate that it's a strong point or strong movement in that direction. Bollinger Band wasn't too bad. It was somewhat saying moving up for the most part of the day. Just the end of the day it happened to be moving down, but it was just not enough to make this a positive trade. It's still a possible though. Next trade is CLNY, Colony Capital. It was indicated at 12:25.23. It was a short sell. It tripped at 417, and surprisingly enough, it came up at the end of the day. So end of the day is showing that it didn't come up. So 12:25, around that area. And during that period, 416, well, technically came down, but here you can see 413 and stuff like that. I'll consider it a possibility because at this point it was down below and could have been traded at that aspect. A difficult trade because it's showing that it did recover a bit and then came down. You would have had to catch it around this point. I still consider it a positive trade because of the fact it did come down and it was down for a good half an hour, it looks like, below the entry price. So So let's just take a look at the analysis. Analysis OBV is basically moving sideways, so nothing strong OBV wise. It did indicate obviously around this time that it was moving down. MACD though is definitely showing that it was moving down late morning, early afternoon, and then somewhat just stabilized in the afternoon. It was basically sideways. DI was showing though somewhat more of a negative movement, so that is a positive thing. Bollinger Band bouncing back and forth, but at the point that it indicated it was coming down and then recovered. Interesting stock. DI though was showing it very much that it was moving negative, so it somewhat validated the trade itself. The next trade is EXAS, Exact Science Corporation. It was tripped at a short sell at 1:31 p.m. It was tripped at 1:16.93. It closed at 1:15.64. It was down 4.8%, so it was down quite a bit. And to me, that's a positive trade. And we'll take a look at the analysis. Into that sheet. As you can see, OBV was somewhat showing it moving negatively, as though it was making a recovery at the end of the day. Volume for positive was moving up. MACD showing roughly the same thing, moving down for the most part of the day. And at the end of the day was showing positive. DI is showing somewhat of a more strong indication moving down for most of the day, but again, like the end of the day, it was moving up. The Bollinger Band showing the same thing. It was moving steadily downwards till the late afternoon, then was making a bit of a recovery, but by then it was already below the trigger price. That's why it's a positive trade. Next trade is ETSY, SD Incorporated. Etsy, I think it's Etsy. It was up 2.55%, so that's a good rise. It was tripped at 1:09:30 p.m. at a price of 127.34, and it closed at 128.82. So it ended the day above its trip price, so that end result-wise is good. As you can see, the stock itself is moving up for the day. So that is an overall good trade. OBV actually very back and forth OBV, so OBV is not somewhat a strong indication of steady progression, but it obviously tripped strongly enough. Acting up for some odd reason. MACD, excuse me. MACD, interestingly enough, is not showing any heavy positive movement. It did trip at early afternoon, excuse me, moving positive, but for the most part, it's actually not showing any strong movement across the board. DI though, again, as you can see, DI is actually showing somewhat a good positive movement, so DI was a good indicator. Bollinger Band just indicating the price was moving up on a regular basis. And it's interesting because the price is moving up on a regular basis, and you would say that should be a strong indication that it's moving in that direction, but the actual analysis is showing that it's somewhat not strongly or not heavily moving that. DI is the best of the indicators, as it's showing that it's somewhat moving positive in a general fashion. That's why you need multiple indicators, because you have to have a positive result of multiple analysis to come to a conclusion for that stock. Next trade is D, Dominion Energy Incorporated. It was indicated as a short sell, down 2.21%. It was tripped at 85.10 at 235.13. It closed the day at 84.17. Another positive trade. Positive in the sense that, it would have been a positive trade if you short sold it. And yeah, you can see end of day price-wise it was just moving downwards. Let's see if the analysis gives an indication that it's moving up there. Yeah, and definitely indication-wise it looks the same thing. Look, OBV just moving downwards in the afternoon. Morning time was basically steady by that baseline, so it was really not showing any movement one way or the other. MACD showing the same thing, but you can see early afternoon it's showing that it was starting to move down. DI is interesting. It's actually showing that it's basically moving sideways, I guess, in the morning till early afternoon, and then late afternoon it's moving down. And when you see the yellow ADX from here shooting up, that means that the indicator is moving heavily, excuse me, in the direction that it's indicating. And the blue is indication of negative movement, and you can see DI, for the most part, moving very much a very steady negative movement. So that probably is a good result of why it dropped. So indicators here actually were good, solid indications. The next trade is ORI. Old Republic International. It was down just a little bit negative, but it was actually tripped as a buy trade. It was tripped at 242.05 at a price of 1861, and again it was a buy indication, and it closed the day at 1863. So it actually is another positive trade, even though the stock itself was down below opening, or down below previous close. So that's interesting. And we'll take a look at the indicators. OBV is showing that volume-wise it was moving somewhat good positive. MACD actually was showing it early afternoon positive, and then it actually negative. DI also showing a positive and then coming down in the day. So DI and MACD are some of the line. Bollinger Band again showing that it kind of like stabilized or started moving sideways via Bollinger Band, which means it basically was staying where it was at and not moving in any direction, positive or negative, as it moved in the afternoon. So it would have been a positive trade because it actually ended the day up above its trigger point. Next trade is INO, Inovio Pharmaceuticals. It was down almost 9%. It was tripped at 2:10 p.m. It was tripped at a price of 11.86, and it was actually tripped as a short sell. So 11.86 is what it was tripped. It went down to 11.70 at the end of the day. As you can see, that's below the tripping price for short selling. That's positive, so that's another positive trade. And the analysis. The analysis is showing, interesting, in OBV, not much activity one way or the other, even though mid-afternoon it actually came down, late afternoon it came back up. MACD showing the same thing, even though it was showing positive in the early afternoon, then came down, moving negative in the mid-afternoon, and came back up. So basically a bounce on MACD. And interestingly, DI is actually showing more of a heavy negative movement. So that's interesting, even though the tripping period it was up. And the Bollinger Band technically is just showing that it was somewhat moving down morning time, afternoon moving sideways, and late afternoon moving down. So it basically just at the end of the day it actually reverted and came down. So the end result is this was again another positive trade. Next trade is FCL. Fuel Cell Energy Incorporated. It was indicated as a buy trade at a time of 2:55.05. It was up 10%, so it was actually up quite good. As you can see, the early morning time it actually came down again. It was tripped at a price of 4.11. It closed the day at 4.12, so it basically, ended the day up. Above, so at the end of the day it was above its tripper price, so it would have been a positive trade. The analysis is showing OBV afternoon actually showing it moving upwards. MACD actually showing it moving sideways in the afternoon, which is when it was tripped. It did this period of time here around 2:55. You can see it actually was tripped around this point, and then just started moving sideways. DI down in the morning and up in the afternoon, but up for the most part all afternoon. And it was again it was up in the afternoon, which was again a result of the price that you see. And Bollinger Band, showing the same thing. It was moving down and came up and started moving up all afternoon. So technically it was a positive trade because it ended the day up. The indicators somewhat semi, but the end of the day result is that it was still positive. Next trade is CSCO, Cisco Systems Incorporated. It was tripped at a period of 3:15:05 p.m. at a price of 41.98, and it was identified as a short sell. It was just down 1.5%, so we're not talking anything drastic. It was again tripped at a price of 41.98 and ended the day at 41.88, so it was down below the tripping price, so that actually is another positive trade. Check the indicators. I think we're at the end of this page. Here we are. So let's go. OBV, it was showing that it was moving somewhat downward starting early afternoon. Basically just went down for the most part. You can see it had a bit of recovery mid-afternoon, but for the most part moving down afternoon. MACD showing the same thing, moving downwards for the most part afternoon. DI showing move down, and again, like I said before, when you see this yellow line here on DI, which is the average, it basically is showing the strength of the movement. And as you can see, it was moving negative in late afternoon, and it was moving very heavily negative in late afternoon, which I think is a good result of the Bollinger Band, or a good correlation with the Bollinger Band, that it actually is again moving it very much downwards. And the day is actually moving sideways, but again it was moving downwards for the part of the afternoon, so the indicator is actually showing very much positive indication. And again, another positive trade. Next trade is CAT, Caterpillar Incorporated. It was tripped at 3:26:34 p.m. at a price of 171.34. It was tripped as a short sell. It was down 0.75%, so not heavily downwards. It was tripped at 171.34. It actually closed the day at 171.91. So that's an endpoint. We're down 171. Okay. You can see that it was tripped roughly around this period, and it came down. It was down for a good half an hour, 3/4 of an hour. It was down below the tripping price. So that's still a positive trade, even though, as you can see, it actually recovered at the end of the day. But Before that, it was down below the trigger price, so that still is a positive trade. And as you can see, OBV again showing it came down in the afternoon and started bouncing back and forth in the afternoon, but came down early afternoon. MACD showing the same thing, came down and came down. So it was actually moving somewhat on a fairly consistent basis across the board in MACD negative-wise. DI again showing the same thing, and it's moving somewhat fairly consistently negative. It was bouncing back and forth. Bollinger Band showing somewhat sideways movement, but it was down below the trigger price for a period of time. That could have been made a sale on. That would have been positive, so that's the result. So another trade that's interesting. And there actually was another trade that I deleted from my list here, and that was GPT, which is Global Blood Therapeutics Incorporated. I'll just line things up here. Have to pardon me 1 second while I find the stock again. Oh, it's this one here, excuse me. Okay, this is the stock here. And it was a buy at 13:05, 14 p.m. It was up 0.5%. It tripped at 13:05.14, which one second, I don't remember the entry price on this one. Take a look at it. Pardon me for 1 second while I go to another screen. And yes, this is actually my database that maintains the results. GPT. It was stripped at 13:05 at a price of 43.30. And as you can see, it was down below the trigger price. And again, it was tripped at 13:05. You can see right at the end of the day there was a point where it was moving up for a good 15 minutes it was above. So technically that's a positive trade, even though as you can see it's still a very short period of time that it was positive. The indication of this stock, OBB, you see showing that it was strongly moving positive at the trigger price. End of the day it was moving up again. MACD, actually MACD is showing that it tripped early afternoon, well around this time, at 105. So again, MACD is showing a trip, but then came down and recovered at the end of the day. DI showing the same thing. It was strong morning till early afternoon, and then was negative or moving downwards for the afternoon, and the end of the day is coming back up. And Bollinger Band somewhat actually, again, morning it came up and then moved somewhat sideways and recovering a little bit. So just because at the end of the day it just moved a little bit positive for maybe a 5-10 minute period of time, it was still a positive trade because you could have gotten out. But the indicators themselves are showing that it's somewhat okay, that it's moving in the direction it's moving, and it should probably stabilize the day after, which is obviously today. So that's the results for today. And again, we had 16 trades, and 12 of them were positive. So that is 75% positive trades for today. One of them was actually a possibility, so you could say with possibility it was actually a little bit higher, closer to 80%. And overall it was a good day still. You can see the market was actually down yesterday. The NASDAQ was down, and Dow looked like it was down for the most part. So the markets were down, which obviously is a result of obviously the short sells coming up more so today. Anyways, I'll leave it at that. Thank you very much.